Hello, everyone. This is the Insider Threat Podcast, an ISO 3103 1980 compliant show where we explore issues with the human factor and its impact on security and business. I'm your host, Steve Higdon.
In this episode, we cover some insider threat news, what it means to be in information security, and more. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back. This is episode 45 of the Insider Threat Podcast for the week of November 12th, 2018. First, I want to give you a little bit of an update on the framework. I think I'm at about a 95% solution, so if I have time this week, it might be coming out next episode. I'll make that available to everyone who's expressed interest in it going forward, and I'd really like, the reason that I'm putting it out at this stage is I really want your feedback. You're the folks who are in this field, who are fighting the good fight, and I strongly value any comments that you have on it. It appears as though I'm not the first one to put out a framework dealing with insider threat, but we'll get more into that towards the end of the episode. I also wanted to mention the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast. This is by Bruce Hallas, and I'm sure I'm messing up that name. But Bruce also came out with a book recently, also called Rethinking the Human Factor. And it's exactly the type of information that we've been talking about for a while. It's how do we improve our organization so that we can reduce the risk of insider threat, but doing that from a personal standpoint, on the people side of it. So when you get some time, check out Bruce's podcast and book. You won't be disappointed. Now that's it for the announcements. It's time for your Infosec Trivia Question, where Google is king and the prize is non-existent. The question last episode was, on October 10th, 1980, a company called Midway released the first true mega-hit video game in history. What was the name of this game? The answer, of course, was Pacman. Now, we've seen several video games hit it big in the last several decades, and I can think of a couple right off the bat. But Pacman is still one that even younger people can associate with, or at least they've heard of it. On that note, though, I had several of you that actually argued that Mrs. Pacman was the better game of the two. Honestly, I didn't spend enough time with either of the games to form an opinion, so I'll just leave that up to you. Congratulations to Xavier from Canada, Marco from Bondville, and Brigitte from Bilingshurst for getting the correct answer. Here's your question for this episode. In November of 1980, Microsoft was approached by IBM to supply an operating system for the PC that IBM had in development. Microsoft was able to get it done, but they did not come up with the operating system themselves. Where did they get it, and what was it called? Send your response to infosecanswer@gmail.com. Be sure to include your first name, location, and the hashtag dirty. And with that, let's move on to the discussion topic for this episode, which is just an overview of what it means to be in this industry. So I guess I'll start this with a question that you're unable to answer at this time, but I'll pretend you're answering. Why are you in the information security industry? What about this makes you tick? And I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently, just trying to figure out why I'm in this field and why I especially have an affinity for insider threat. Now I get it, some people are into the technology, some are into compliance or auditing, and others are just really good technical writers, so they've found a place in this industry. But here's what I've come up with, and let me know if you agree. I believe that we just really like to help people and businesses improve. And I understand that's probably a pretty general statement, but when I was at B-Sides DC, I guess it was a few weekends ago now, that really is a feeling that I got from the community. And admittedly, that might just be because I spent most of my time with the volunteers and the organizers for the event, but everyone just seems to have that same feeling. Like, we are here to make the world a better place. I know that sounds really corny, but that's the feeling that I get whenever I go to these events. So am I wrong in this? Is there something else that drives you to get up in the morning and get to work? I know a lot of people might say the money, because there is admittedly a lot of money in the information security field, especially today, but that can't be what keeps us here. That might be what gets people into the industry, but that can't be what keeps people here. So yeah, just something that I've been thinking about recently. Please let me know. Hit me up on Twitter. I'll give you that at the end. Well, it's at Steve Higdon. Really easy to find. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Actually, that's a perfect thing. What got you into this field? And then what kept you into this field? So 2 questions. And it might be the same for some of you, but it might be completely different. So that's it for that one. Let's move on to the news. The first thing I've got here is the U.S. government released an Insider Threat Program Maturity Framework. And you might be thinking, wait, Steve, aren't you working on a framework for insider threat? And the answer is obviously yes, but I think the focus between the 2 frameworks is different enough that they can both exist, and I'll explain. If you look at this maturity framework, and I did leave a link in the show notes if you want to look at it, and you should, by the way, there is some good information in there. But being from the government, and we talked about this a little bit a few episodes ago when we were talking about the different types of insider threat programs, the government likes to focus on like the Edward Snowden, Manning sort of cases where someone on the inside is being malicious and exfiltrating data. That's their number one focus. But as we know, the overwhelming majority of insider threat incidents aren't caused by malicious people. It's those who are clicking on links. They're accidentally or negligently doing something to increase risk to the organization. And I'm not saying at all, again, that this framework is useless, not bashing it whatsoever, because if you actually look at it, it's more focusing on the program itself, the leadership, the support, that sort of thing. It's less about what we're trying to do with the Insider Threat Protection Framework, which is actually give a list of controls and some explanation on here's some things that you need to specifically do in order to improve your security posture when it comes to insider threat. So it's good that they both exist. We need them both to exist, or I guess both will exist once the Insider Threat Protection Framework is released. So give it a look when you've got some time. Now, the next news article here is it looks like people are still attempting to sue the government over the OPM hack of 2014. And according to the article, the judge that's actually hearing this appeals case claims that it's going to be very difficult for the government to prove that the victims of the breach don't have standing to sue. They don't have a right to sue. I think one of the arguments that was used is that there's no evidence of actual fraud or identity theft or anything like that happening because of this breach. And I think that statement alone highlights a very big problem when it comes to these breaches and personal information. It's not about the impact of the breach. We're not valuing people's personal information. There has to be a dollar amount associated with someone's personal information. That's the only way, or one of the only ways probably, that we're going to see real change in this arena, where organizations are actively and very strongly protecting the data of their consumers, or in this case, of course it's the government, they're not even consumers. These are just people involved in background investigations. But we've got to think of this sensitive personal information as like a secret. And if your friend trusts you with a secret and then you don't protect that secret, then that's on you. And that should be really bad. You shouldn't come back and say, well, nothing happened when that information came out. Nobody used it against you, so it's not my fault. That's not how trust works. And that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing here. And not many people are successful in suing the United States government, so it's going to be really interesting to see where this one goes. If you'd like to read up on it, there's actually several articles out there, and I've linked one in the show notes. Our closing thought for this episode comes from Bill Gates. He said, "It's fine to celebrate success, but it's more important to heed the lessons of failure." Thank you for listening to this episode of the Insider Threat Podcast. Please remember to subscribe and review in your favorite podcast app, and also share with everyone you know. Those reviews are key to building this out and improving for later episodes, so please feel free to leave suggestions. You can contact me on Twitter at Steve Higdon or send an email to steve@theinsiderthreatpodcast.com. Go to our website, which is again www.theinsiderthreatpodcast.com, to find the show notes for this and every other episode, as well as links to the topics we've covered. You can also go to the website to find a link to the Patreon page and subscribe to the newsletter to get up-to-date information on current episodes and news for the show. Call and leave a voicemail at 443-292-2287 to have a conversation, get a comment added to the show, or even ask a question. Thanks again, and I'll see you folks next time.